The Georgia rain fell like bullets on the corrugated metal roof, each drop echoing through the abandoned factory where Jacob Winters pressed himself against a rust-stained pillar. His breathing came in controlled bursts, the way they taught him in Army Ranger training, before the world ended, before his unit scattered like leaves in a hurricane of teeth and hunger. 7 years. 7 years since he'd watched his commanding officer's throat torn open by what used to be a suburban soccer mom. 7 years of wandering the wasteland with nothing but a broken compass and the weight of survivors he'd failed to save. The smell hit him first, that distinctive cocktail of decay and wet earth that meant walkers nearby. Jacob's scarred fingers found the grip of his suppressed M4, muscle memory overriding the phantom pain in his left shoulder where shrapnel from a Savior IED still worked its way toward the surface. Through the factory's shattered windows, he counted at least 12 shapes shambling between rusted machinery. Their moans harmonized with the rain, creating a symphony of death that never failed to make his skin crawl. But it wasn't the walkers that concerned him, it was the fresh tire tracks in the mud outside, the kind made by military vehicles that still had fuel and purpose. "Movement 2 o'clock, whispered a voice behind him. Jacob spun, rifle raised, to find a woman emerging from the shadows. Asian features, tactical gear, eyes like chips of obsidian. She moved with the fluid grace of someone who'd learned to survive in spaces between heartbeats. "Easy, soldier boy," she said, noting his stance. "If I wanted you dead, you'd already be cooling on that floor. Who are you?" Jacob's voice carried the gravelly edge of too many nights breathing smoke and cordite. "Yumiko. And you're making enough noise to wake the dead, literally." She gestured toward the factory floor where the walkers had begun turning in their direction. "We need to move. Now." Before Jacob could respond, the thunder of diesel engines cut through the storm. Through gaps in the factory walls, he glimpsed olive-drab vehicles rolling into the compound, Humvees with mounted .50 calibers, troop transports that spoke of organization and firepower. The Commonwealth. He'd heard whispers in survivor camps, stories of a militarized settlement that conscripted wanderers and never let them leave. The broken compass in his pocket seemed to grow heavier. "Sweep and clear," a voice boomed through a megaphone. "All civilians report for processing." Jacob's blood turned to ice water. He'd been processed once before by a group calling themselves the New Republic. He still had the brand on his forearm and the nightmares of their recruitment techniques. "Back exit," Yumiko hissed, already moving toward a gap in the rear wall. But as they reached the opening, a figure stepped into view that made Jacob's world tilt on its axis. Rick Grimes. The legendary leader looked older, grayer, but those piercing blue eyes were unmistakable. Behind him stood 3 Commonwealth soldiers, assault rifles at ready. "That's far enough," Rick said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had kept communities alive through impossible odds. But something was different, the way he held himself, the subtle tension in his shoulders. Jacob's mind raced. Everyone knew the stories. Rick Grimes, the cop who'd saved Alexandria, who'd stood against the saviors and the whisperers. But here he was, apparently working with the Commonwealth. "Rick?" Yumiko's voice betrayed confusion. "What the hell are you doing?" "What I have to do." Rick's expression was carved from stone. "The Commonwealth offers stability, protection, things our people need." "Bullshit," Jacob found himself saying. The word came out harder than intended, years of betrayal and disappointment compressed into 2 syllables. Rick's eyes fixed on him, and Jacob felt like a specimen under a microscope. "You're military." Was. Jacob's grip tightened on his weapon. "Before everything went to hell. Then you understand the value of order. Discipline." Rick stepped closer, hands visible but ready. "The Commonwealth has resources. Infrastructure. They're rebuilding civilization." "By conscripting survivors?" Jacob's voice rose despite himself. "By processing people like livestock?" Something flickered in Rick's eyes, doubt, perhaps, or regret. But it was gone before Jacob could be sure. The moment shattered as walkers burst through the factory's main entrance, drawn by the sound of engines and voices. The creatures moved with jerky determination, their rotted hands reaching toward the promise of fresh meat. "Contact!" one of the Commonwealth soldiers shouted. The factory erupted in gunfire. Muzzle flashes strobed through the rain-darkened space like lightning, illuminating scenes of controlled chaos. Jacob moved on instinct, his rifle bucking against his shoulder as he put down walkers with precise headshots. "Breathe. Fire. Move." The mantra carried him through the engagement, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought faltered. Yumiko flowed like water between the shambling corpses, her katana singing through the air in lethal arcs. Each stroke was poetry written in steel and necessity, heads separating from shoulders with surgical precision. But more walkers poured through the breach, and Jacob realized with growing horror that the sound of gunfire was drawing others. Through the factory's broken windows, he glimpsed shapes emerging from the tree line. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. "We're about to be overrun," he shouted over the cacophony. Rick's voice cut through the noise with battlefield authority, tactical withdrawal. "Move to the vehicles." They fought their way toward the rear exit, leaving a trail of twice-dead corpses in their wake. Jacob's shoulder screamed protest as he hauled Yumiko behind an overturned forklift, Commonwealth soldiers laying down suppressing fire to cover their retreat. "Why are you helping us?" Jacob demanded as they pressed against the improvised cover. Rick's answer came between controlled bursts from his rifle. "Because some things matter more than orders." The admission hung in the air like gin smoke as they made their final push for the exit. Jacob found himself fighting beside the man who'd become a legend, and despite everything, the Commonwealth uniforms, the apparent betrayal, he felt a spark of the old faith. They burst into the storm-lashed courtyard just as the factory's front wall gave way to the weight of undead bodies. The sight was biblical in its horror, a tide of rotting flesh and gnashing teeth pouring into the space they'd occupied moments before. "Vehicles," Rick commanded. They ran through ankle-deep mud toward the idling Humvees, walker moans rising behind them like the sound of Hell's Gates opening. Jacob's boots slipped on the treacherous ground, and for a heart-stopping moment he went down, mud filling his mouth as hands reached for him from the darkness. Yumiko's blade swept in a silver arc, severing grasping fingers before they could find purchase. She hauled him upright with surprising strength, her face grim with determination. "Move your ass, soldier boy." They reached the vehicles as the first wave of walkers spilled from the factory. Jacob dove into the nearest Humvee just as its engine roared to life, Yumiko landing beside him in a tangle of limbs and weapons. Through the bulletproof glass, he watched Rick climb into the lead vehicle's passenger seat, saw the conflict written in the set of his shoulders. Whatever game the legendary leader was playing, it was costing him pieces of his soul. The convoy rolled out into the Georgian wilderness, leaving behind the factory full of the hungry dead. But as they drove through the rain-soaked landscape, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that he'd traded one form of captivity for another. The broken compass in his pocket pointed nowhere in particular, but for the first time in years, Jacob thought he might be heading toward something that mattered. The road ahead stretched into uncertainty, but it was a road shared with others, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to keep moving forward.